welcome to Hedgehog Hollow. Today I'm showing you how to make this lovely Hero Arts Koi Valentine's Day card. Perfect as a masculine card. Of course you could change up the colours from the greys and charcoals we're going to be using, or you could stick to something this nice and muted. I also love the idea of doing this as kind of a yin and yang, doing it for peace or something else. So I think it's a really versatile design. We're going to be using the Layering Koi stamp set here from Hero Arts. Now your fish has 4 parts. So you've got those 3 main ones I showed you, and you've also got the little face in there. You've got the option for making lily pads, and you've got the option of a little flower on there too. So I'm going to be using my MISTI. I've got some Neenah Solar White that I'm going to pop in here, and we're going to be making 2 kois, and then we'll be cutting those out. I actually have the coordinating dies for this one. So I'm using the white from Lawn Fawn, and 2 of those greys as well on there. So let's start stamping out our koi. So you're going to start with your most solid image first, and I'll be doing one at the top, one at the bottom, and using a stamp tool like this is perfect for getting that stamp out. So I'm going to be starting off with the Lawn Fawn white pad. It's actually a pigment pad, so you will see that I'll heat set this with my heat tool as well. So I'm going to stamp, as you can see, one there, and then I'm going to turn my cardstock around and I'm going to stamp another one. And by doing that, it means that each time I position the piece on the koi, I only have to position it once. And you can see there I was wrestling with which magnet to use on there. So once I stamp this out, I can then just keep turning it around, and each layer will be perfectly done. I don't have to do it each time. So you can just about see on there I have the white piece, and you will need, as I say, to dry that off with a heat tool because it is a pigment ink rather than a dye ink, so it's not going to go in there. Now you may think, well, why do I need to go with the dye? Well, you'll see there's a slight difference in colour between the Neenah Solar White and that white ink pad, and what that gives you is a really nice white, true white, I guess you could call it, underneath your fish. So that's why I left that in there. And then we're ready to start on our next layers. So I'm just cleaning off my stamp with the stamp Shammy there, my favourite cleaning tool. Find that is perfect to go and clean all my stamps with. And I actually put mine in the washing machine. So whenever I do a wash of my dishcloths and tea towels and things like that, I'll just throw my stamp Shammy in there. I don't put it in the dryer. I don't dry it out. I just get it out the washing machine, give it a good squeeze out, and I find it's nice and clean, and a regular clean like that is perfect. Occasionally I will put kind of a small cap of bleach in a sink if I've used a lot of black ink pads and things. So there's a couple of tips in there for you as well. So now that my pigment ink is dry, and you can see that I used my Wagner heat tool to dry that off, we're ready to start with our next layers. And there's actually 3 more layers to put on our fish. One is only the face, but you can see I was waiting for that ink to dry there as well. So our second one is a little bit more open expanse, so it's really nice to build these up. I love these Hero Arts layering sets. Excuse my head in there, but if you're at a straight angle over it, you'll get a much better line up. I try to line up the edge of the tail and the nose, and I'm stamping this in the Manatee, so that's a slightly, it's a nice light grey. It'll layer perfectly over that white, but as I say, do make sure that white is fully dry, and you may have to ink it up a couple of times. You are stamping over a pigment ink rather than onto cardstock, but that will give you a really nice even tone. So you can see there we've got that nice tone coming in. You can start to see how we're getting some of that detail into the fish, and by using a couple of other colours we'll get some really dark details in there. And then I can just switch my cardstock around and ink it up, and off I go again. So that's the beauty of using a stamp positioning tool. So whether you use the MISTI or the Tim Holtz tool or whatever your preferred tool is, if you do it that way, you'll see that you can save yourself some time on multiple stamping. Particularly if maybe you're making a few of these fishes, you might find that that really does save you some time. So now we're adding those back details. Again, put my head straight over, so excuse that getting in the shot there, but that just means I get some better layering. We're using Hippo, which is a darker grey, to stamp out those extra details, and you can see how that's really coming together. There's also some oranges that are on the back of the stamp set, and I've used those on a previous card that I did at scrapbook.com, so hop on over to their channel if you want to see what I did with masking. I used Distress Oxides and created a fun card over there with those oranges. Now we're ready to do the eyes and nose. Now the first time I actually did this stamp set, I missed those. I didn't realise that they were for my fish. It does tell you on the back of the stamp set, so I hadn't in fact looked well enough. And I'm just using the Lawn Fawn Black Licorice, really nice colour scheme there. The reason I didn't use the Hero Arts was just because I didn't have them in my stash. I really do like those little Hero Arts cubes, but I didn't have enough shades of the grey. So as part of this set, it came with some dies because I bought it as a bundle. It came with some ink cubes, the dies and the stamp set. So rather than using my scan and cut, which you know I normally do, I'm going to be using those dies. Again, I'm going to cut those out using my new Gemini Junior that I have been using, and I'm going to show you. I made actually a mistake, but it's something that's worth showing you what I did. And I happened to do my sandwich slightly wrong. So when you use the Gemini, that should actually be turned the other way up. So I get the plain piece of cardstock, and you'll see it's kind of cut into my magnetic mat there. It didn't do any damage. It didn't cut all the way through, but that was my error. And that's the only thing about the Gemini that I am still getting used to. It's just doing my sandwich the other way up, but I'm sure I'll get there. And I'm really pleased with it. Other than that, I really also like the magnet in it compared to the Sizzix magnet because it doesn't move around in any way. So it's just a nice magnetic sheet. So that's the way it should look, so that you have the back of your cardstock there. Now I started off with a card base, and I pre-cut out of some masking paper from Inkadinkado that circle there, and I'd stuck it onto my card front. Now I do actually change my mind later on, so you can either stick with this idea if you like it, or later on I'm going to cut that circle out and you can go with that option too. This card kind of evolved as I went along. So I'm using my Distress Oxides. You could use Distress inks if you don't have Oxides in your collection. I really like the Oxides for this. And the reason I put that piece of paper there is I noticed some of my ink was just going over the edges of my masking paper, and that was just to keep the cardstock clean. So I'm building up a couple of colours here. So I've got Salty Ocean, Broken China and Faded Denim, and I'm going darker on the outside, lighter towards the middle, because I want to make it look like he's swimming over some water, whether you want to call it a pond or a lake or something, but I wanted to add a little bit of depth. So you can see I've got that Faded Denim on the outside. I'm using a barber's brush on a Ranger craft mat. I cut those down. They're actually the size of my MISTIs and my Tim Holtz platforms because I always keep them in there. I do have some bigger ones as well in the cupboard, but I don't find that I ever really get those out. So now when I remove that masking paper, imagine it's a big post-it note is a good way to think of it. I'm also going to add some Distress Sprayer in there, and I realised I wanted to do that while my masking paper was still down because my original plan was not to cut this out, so I didn't want it on the rest of my card. Now the reason I'm adding water is these oxides will oxidize, so you'll get some variation in patterns. The Distress Sprayer is really nice, so you'll see it as in my gift guide. And you can get sort of harsh mist, really heavy mist, or you can get a really nice light mist. And you can see there the nice variation I've got in droplets. And if you use regular distress inks, you're still going to get some nice variation in colour. You just won't get as much oxidization, if that's the word I'm looking for, on the droplets themselves, but you can see there how that really does look like a lovely piece of water. And that I'm actually drying with my Ranger Heat It tool, which is perfect for anything with water because it will not move the water around like your embossing heat tool, which is why I have both of those tools. And I find I use both of them probably equally as often because I like to do a nice watery background and then I want to do some heat embossing maybe for the sentiment or on the piece itself. So this is the point where I got to, and I thought, actually, I want to cut this out and layer it and add some more depth. So I grabbed that circle, which is a scrapbook.com basics, which again is what I used when I went down to see them in Phoenix. This is my new scoreboard. So I have just bought the EK Tools scoreboard. It's great value. And I'm just trying it out. I also have a score pal that I'm trying out, so I'll report back on how I get on with those. I'm really trying to be good and score my card bases rather than just folding them in half, which is what I typically do. I do recommend this Teflon bone folder. You know, I was skeptical. I've mentioned it in lots of videos when I first bought it, but I find I have far less cracking on my cards and it is really handy to have. So if you can get that in your crafty budget, I definitely would add that in, and I'll link that in the description below. There'll be a full supply list there, Plus there's a blog post for you to hop on over to that has that supply list in. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. You can subscribe to the blog by email. You can see our new logos over there. And if you do subscribe to our newsletter, it will prompt you when you get on over there, www.thehedgehoghollow.com. And it will prompt you to join our newsletter where there's exclusive content and giveaways there too. So I'm embossing this love sentiment on some Lawn Fawn black cardstock that I'm using the Ultra New white embossing powder and some Versamark ink there. And they're also Lawn Fawn blocks. I recently got those and love those too. So this is my favorite trimmer. We go through this a lot. I love the guides in this. It really does help me get a nice straight sentiment. So you can see that I lined up the love, and then from there I just go around and make sure it's nice and straight. So I also cut a black circle, which is in a slightly larger size, and you can see it also gives you a nice beveled edge on there, which is a really lovely finishing touch. So to mount this up, we're going to be putting all our layers on there. I wasn't sure where to put the sentiment, but I do love where it actually ended up. I'm using my tonic funky tape onto that black, that's still Lawn Fawn cardstock there as well. I'm using my big roll of foam that you see me use all the time onto the back there. And then I'm also putting some pieces on the back of the koi, and you can cut those down. So you could either do some thin strips or you could do some bigger ones like this. But I want to pop those up, lots of detail on this one. You can see there where I just trimmed the piece in half to go on the back of our sentiment. So now we're ready to assemble. It is just a regular A2 card base from some Neenah Solar White. I'm going to put that kind of biased towards the top when you see the end of the card, and then I'm going to stick my koi on, and you'll see this is kind of my process for making cards. I want them to intersect, as I said to you, almost like that yin and yang, and I think they look really nice once I eventually press down. This is the other really nice thing about that Scotch foam tape. It's quite forgiving. You can move things around a little bit until you're happy with them before you end up sticking them down. So this is what I do when I have a sentiment. I kind of think, well, do I want it on the card? Do I want it somewhere around them? Do I want to make sure it fits in somewhere? And then I found that lovely little bit on the left-hand side that it just fitted in perfectly. It was definitely the right space for it. And I'm really pleased that I did put it there. So that's where I stuck that love in. If you position your fish slightly different, you may want it in a different place. But I'm really pleased with this card. It's definitely a great Valentine's Day card. As I say, you could do it for peace, love, harmony, all sorts of fun things on there. So thanks so much for joining me here today. Do hit that subscribe button so you see all of our latest videos. Plus, we're at Creativation. We've got lots of content from there for you too. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button or stamp it if you prefer. And I will see you again in another video very soon. Happy stamping. Bye.